So here's where Canada stands right now. Mark Carney has locked in a new trade coalition covering more than 40 nations. He has secured Arctic defense infrastructure worth tens of billions of dollars. He has opened new economic channels with Europe, the Nordics, India, and China. Canada is building an entirely new economic architecture, one that does not need to depend on the USA.
And while all of that was happening, Pierre Poilievre flew to Texas, sat in a podcast studio, and performed for an American audience as his team chased attention with religious theater in Parliament. Listen, last week was a pretty good reminder that copying the American right wing is not the flex that Canada's Conservatives think it is.
And that contrast is not a coincidence. It's not just embarrassing for Conservatives, it's telling Canadians something fundamental about who these two men actually are and what each of them actually believes Canada's future looks like.
The Conservatives have a big problem, Dave. They're still acting like attention is the same thing as leadership, like a viral clip can do the work of credibility. But Canadians have spent years watching what happened in the United States when politics turned into a permanent performance. We have seen where that road goes, and more people up here want no part of it.
Yep, because this is not really about one Bible in Parliament or one podcast appearance. It's about a pattern. The Canadian right keeps borrowing the Republican-style playbook. More invented victimhood, more symbolism, more carefully staged outrage, more attempts to turn every disagreement into some grand moral showdown. And every time that they do it, they look a little less like a government in waiting and a little more like a MAGA franchise operation.
Exactly. So let's start with Parliament, because that one, it said a lot. Holding up a Bible in the House may have thrilled a slice of the base, but outside of that little bubble, it landed very differently. Most Canadians do not see that and think, wow, that's strong, man. They see political theater. They see a politician trying to import the kind of religious performance politics that has already poisoned public life in the United States.
You know, we were talking to a friend the other day, and he said something that really stuck with us. He said it almost felt like they wanted to get called out or kicked out so that they could turn around and scream that Christians are being discriminated against. And honestly, that's exactly how this stuff works now, unfortunately. The point is not the stunt itself. The point is to provoke the reaction and then use that reaction as proof of persecution.
And that is why this wasn't harmless. This wasn't just some awkward photo op. It is the importation of a very specific kind of politics where public religion is used less as personal conviction and more as a political weapon. You stage the moment, you wait for criticism, and then you tell your supporters that faith itself is under attack. It's cynical, it's divisive, and Canadians should be able to see the setup for what it is.
And the person running this script is not some random backbencher either. It's Jamil Jivani, the MP from the Bowmanville area of Ontario, the man who is deeply connected to the J.D. Vance wing of the American right. He's promoted the idea that Christians are under siege in Canada. He runs a project called Take Back the North, which is like a Charlie Kirk imitation. He's deliberately importing the manosphere-adjacent politics like young male resentment, persecution politics, and identity outrage and trying to wrap it in a Canadian flag.
And that should worry everyone, because once you start importing that framework, you're not just talking about faith. You're importing the whole victimhood machine that comes with it.
And that's what makes it dangerous. Because this is not some organic Canadian movement. It's a cross-border ideological import, and a pretty obvious one at that.
And that's where the Conservatives keep misreading the country. Listen, Canada is not anti-faith. People are free to be religious, they can vote with their convictions, and they can speak openly about their values. But Parliament is supposed to be a place where they govern a diverse country. They're not supposed to be auditioning for applause from the right wing.
Listen, Canadians, we're highly educated. We still have a media landscape that mostly functions, and we still have enough critical thinking across the country to spot when faith is being used as a political prop. The second that happens, a lot of people pull back and see what's really going on.
especially now because nobody is looking at the US and thinking, yeah, let's bring a little more of that here. They're looking south and seeing division, institutional decay, endless wars, and politicians who confuse provocation with courage. So when Canadian Conservatives try to echo that style, it doesn't come across as bold, it comes across as secondhand.
And then there's Pierre Poilievre going on Joe Rogan. And look, I get why they thought that was a win. Rogan has reach, he has a huge audience, and in conservative circles, there's still this fantasy that one big long-form appearance can break through the media filter and change everything. But that only works if the audience you need actually respects the platform you're chasing.
And that's where this all starts to fall apart. The people already deep in Poilievre's camp were always going to love it. But the voters he actually needs, like older Canadians, suburban Canadians, women, moderate conservatives, soft liberals, even a lot of independents, well, they're not sitting around waiting for Joe Rogan to decide who should leave Canada. That appearance may energize the faithful, but it doesn't magically expand the coalition.
And I have to say, I was pretty disappointed about how low the bar was afterward. Yet pundits on CBC and CTV praising him because he didn't insult Canada or attack Mark Carney on foreign soil. Sorry, but that's not leadership. That's the bare minimum of being Canadian. Have we really sunk so low that a politician gets celebrated just because he managed not to trash his own country while sitting in an American studio?
And that reaction kind of proves the point, Dave. If the biggest compliment people can come up with is that he behaved himself and didn't embarrass the country, then this wasn't some major political breakthrough. It was a successful containment exercise.
In fact, for Canadians, his appearance may do the exact opposite, right? Because, once again, it sends the signal that Poilievre is still trying to win points in an American political and media world. Maybe hoping that charm softens tariffs or wins back goodwill, while Canada has already started moving on. Carney's building trade diversification, new alliances, and a future where we're not so dependent on the US as our sole provider. So, well, Pierre is, still performing inside that old orbit. Carney is building the exit ramp.
And Canada's mood and focus changed for a reason. Canadians watched the Trump years. They watched institutions get battered, facts become optional, and political identity turn into a full-time blood sport. Then they watched some of that language and energy start to creep north. And now when our conservatives reach for the same tactics, well, Canadians, we're not dazzled. We are being warned.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Carney is benefiting from that contrast without even having to shout about it or talk about it. While the Conservatives are trying to dominate the feed, Carney's outdoing the less glamorous but much more important work of actually building Canada's position in the world. He's doing that with trade talks, strategic partnerships, defense discussions, economic diversifications, real things with real consequences.
And that's the part that really hurts Poilievre politically. While he's still trying to win points in an American media ecosystem, Carney has already moved on to building Canada's post-US strategy.
We covered it on this channel in depth, and you can find all of it in the links below. The bridging CETA and CPTPP into a wider trade coalition at the WTO, joining Europe's safe defense procurement plan, tightening military and procurement ties with the Nordics, securing the North with a massive Arctic buildout, and reopening economic channels with countries like India and China. That's the difference. Poilievre is still performing inside that old relationship, and Carney is building the next one.
And that matters because geopolitics is no longer some abstract game played in faraway places by diplomats in boring suits. It affects the price of goods, which we're seeing now, the strength of the dollar, jobs, energy, supply chains, defense, and whether Canada can stand on its own when the Americans become unstable, which they are. So when Carney is out there making deals, it's not just elite networking. That's him trying to reduce Canada's exposure to a very unreliable world.
And that is the part that Poilievre's team keeps missing. In a moment of global volatility, voters start rewarding the person who looks steady, serious, and useful. They start asking, who can actually protect this country's interests? Who can make sure that Canada is not cornered by trade pressure, defense uncertainty, or other rounds of nonsense coming from Washington? And right now, Carney looks like the guy doing all that work.
And the Conservatives, they look like they're still fighting the last war. Their instincts are still built around rage and anger, disruption, and anti-elite branding. Well, that worked when people were in a punish the system mood, but right now the system itself feels very fragile. So the politician promising more conflict doesn't automatically look strong anymore. He's looking reckless.
And this is why the American mimicry is backfiring. In the US, Republican politics train voters to treat the spectacle as substance, to believe that if a politician offended the right people, that itself was proof of courage. But Canadians, we're a little bit more skeptical of that formula. We tend to ask the annoying follow-up question. Yes, but can you actually do the job?
What a concept!
And that contrast is what this whole story is really about. One side is chasing applause from its own digital tribe. The other is trying to build Canada's leverage in a world that is getting rougher by the second. One side still performing the rebellion, and the other is performing government. And more Canadians than the Conservatives want to admit are choosing the second one.
Which is why this matters beyond party politics. This is about whether Canada wants to become a copy of the dysfunction south of the border or learn from it. You know, sometimes boring competence starts to look pretty good.
Very true. And that's the irony, because Conservatives think this style makes them look tougher. But Canadians, we're too smart for that now. We've already seen that US version. We've already seen the damage it does and it's continuing to do. So when our own right tries to repackage it with a Canadian label slapped on the front, well, more and more people are saying, no thanks, we know what that is. And right now, that is not a great fight for Poilievre, because every week he spends chasing symbolic wins is another week that Carney gets to look like the one doing the job. Every week, the Conservatives lean harder into borrowed Republican tactics is another week that they remind voters why they were rejected in the first place.
We'll keep following the bigger story because this isn't just about one stunt, one interview, or one bad week for the Conservatives. This is about whether Canada is smart enough to build a future that doesn't depend on copying a country that is busy unraveling itself.
So that'll do it for today, but don't forget to check out the pinned comment for those videos about the Canadian wins and to find links to the fun stuff like the A-Team, our Substack, our Facebook, and our merch. So we'll be right here tomorrow, so make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. We post every single day, and you do not want to miss what comes next, because things are moving fast, and Canada is moving with them.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.
Ciao for now.